carry the day. We are live from the Tallying Center and lots of analysis here. Also on the show, which way wheelbarrow? Testing time for Ruto's vehicle of choice for State House. Plus, the umpteenth funeral of NASA. NASA never dies. And the endless obituaries. Who is next? On the kicker tonight, lessons from the Zuma mayhem. Jamila's memo cries out for the Kenyan parent. Yvonne takes on the end of COVID-19, or is it? Well, on the angle tonight, the power to read and pay for it with an arm and a leg. All right, we have Wilson Mushore tonight. He's a guest gangster on the other side doing our sign language interpretation. Ladies and gentlemen, we can't go anywhere else. We have to go to Kiambaa. It's been such a day. We've seen quite some drama. Right now, the UDA candidate, Francis Njuguna Wanjiku.
John, actually.
John, yeah?
John.
Oh, and it's... Okay.
John?
John
Njuguna Wanjiku.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So, you know, I thought for a moment I said Jane. But anyway. so John Njuguna Wanjiku and Kariri Njama in a tight race, quite frankly, but as it is now, the UDA candidate seems to have taken an early lead there. Francis, walk us through this. I mean, I remember one of the interesting things that you told me as this was starting was that UDA looked popular in the place, but the candidate wasn't very well known. The Jubilee candidate was very well known. Jubilee was having challenges for all the things that are going on there. So it was always going to be an interesting race.
And the numbers can tell you. You have both candidates with about 7,000 votes out of the results that have streamed in from about 58 polling stations or thereabout, out of 154. And you can see it's quite a tight race. This is basically what every so often you hear, every vote counts. And literally every vote is counting there. We've seen all manner of results coming from both camps. Actually, when you speak to the UDA team, they tell you they have won it. When you speak to the Jubilee team, they say they have won it. Interestingly, both teams had agents in all the polling stations. And so you would expect that their agents were sending their results to maybe their parallel tallying center for the respective teams. So each team is claiming victory in Kiambaa. Each team is claiming victory in Mogoga. But what is important is to look at the results that are coming from IEBC. And here you see a gap of about 800 votes or thereabout, quite significant, bearing in mind that it is a by-election.
Yeah.
The challenge is in maintaining that lead. And bearing in mind that also this is a constituency that has 98,000 registered voters in 154 polling stations. So once you get maybe to about 100 polling stations mark, the race is now clearly defined. For now, let's continue looking at the numbers as they stream in, because the IBC numbers ndio kusema.
Yeah, Linus, people claiming victory left, right, and center in such elections we've seen before, it's almost as if claiming victory is just as important as the victory itself.
Absolutely, and especially for a race that has been propped up as a massive showdown. You started off by saying Jubilee versus Jubilee. It can be expanded to other areas. Remember, this is Tanga versus Kieleweke, and then remember, more consequentially, this is Jubilee versus UDA, and then, more frankly, Uhuru Kenyatta versus William Ruto. So this is a huge night for both of them. That is the president and the deputy president. And I agree with Francis. In a by-election, a difference of 800 votes is...
It's not comforting.
It's not comfortable at all. Yeah. It's not comfortable, especially when the difference is against you. So for President Uhuru Kenyatta, if these numbers hold tonight, then the president is actually staring at a nightmare in his nearest screen. For William Ruto and his hustler supporters, if the numbers stay the way they are for the night, I don't know, I would go for that line that football commentators like using, do not adjust your sets. And it's not even midnight yet. It's looking good for UDA. If they can keep the difference of 800 votes or even 500, and considering this is a by-election, then they're in for a big night and a shocker.
I know we're only recording or reporting, getting reports from 58 out of the 154, polling centers across this constituency, polling stations across this constituency. But either way, even if Jubilee were to beat UDA by a small margin, the fact that UDA would have been able to garner such a high number of votes and be neck and neck with Jubilee still does say something, and is still, taking the battle to Jubilee's stronghold and saying, we are here and we are contenders. So this is really Jubilee's race to lose, and this will be a tough one for them either way. They win by a small margin, it still says something about the fact that UDA has made these inroads into what is typically Jubilee's territory, when for all intents and purposes these two were, the same party, not too long ago. Of course, if UDA beats Jubilee, then, that just adds to the significant string of losses that we have seen Jubilee suffer in recent by-elections, both at ward level and at constituency level. Would be interesting to see, I think for me, I would be interested to see what would the comparison be between Kiambaa constituency and Juja constituency. Remember, in Juja, the Jubilee party was beaten hands down. I think, was it the PEP candidate getting, I think, a little more than twice the number of votes the Jubilee candidate got. So I think, for me, this would be an interesting night for UDA, whichever way it goes.
And Joe, I think what we're seeing in this by-election is, I think, what we see across the country during by-elections in terms of voter turnout. I think so far it's slightly over 15%. The chairman of IEBC had spoken earlier in the day, said at that point they were looking at about 20% of registered voters, who are about slightly over 96,000 in that
95,000.
Yes, in that constituency. But you talk about if this trend continues and what it means for UDA winning in the president's backyard, if that is how the trend continues. And then looking at how much resources was put into campaigns into Kiambaa, the political bigwigs that we saw there, led by Majority Leader Amos Kimunya, until today we're seeing him there being harassed a bit by voters, wakisema aende, must go. The resources, the time, the energy that was expended, and I think also to some extent the state machineries were supporting the Jubilee candidate, and if it doesn't go the Jubilee's way, this is a huge deal. We keep talking about how UDA believes that they've made inroads into central Kenya. This would be evidence that maybe it is true that UDA, claims by UDA that they've made inroads into central Kenya will have been proven right.
I saw the numbers just changed there, and I think the margin is now about 600.
Yeah. It's about 799 because it's 60 polling stations, 8,083 for the UDA candidate, 7,284 for the Jubilee candidate. That's a difference of about 799.
Now, this is something else which one would say. I mean, like, we have to push this to the limit a little bit. This notion that UDA has made significant inroads and therefore it's necessarily a good thing. I think that if we are looking at using this as some kind of barometer for the next general election, then it would be a good thing, yes, but it can only be the beginning. Why do I say that? Like, in terms of the general election that we are going into, if William Ruto is going to make a significant dent to the point of winning the election, then he needs to actually do better in President Kenyatta's backyard, in the sense that there's no way that he can do like some 50-50 thing with whatever formation the president will be supporting and still hope actually to win. So this can only be a beginning point for him if he hopes to make some significant gains that then make it easier for him to win the presidency. In this central regions of the country where the president got 90-something% of the vote, he absolutely would have to get that sort of margin and then now hope to get everything that the president got the last time around. Because, I mean, if this is being used as some kind of a barometer for what might happen next year, then it's only a place to start from and build, so that his margins in that region are something way better than what we'll see. Because if this holds like this, it will still be 50-something and 40-something, which again would mean that whereas the president may have lost some grounds, but he will still be, can still be very successful in sufficiently dividing that vote in a way that then, you know, basically jeopardizes the DP's chances.
Absolutely, and the Mount Kenya region particularly, looking at how it voted in 2013 and how it voted in 2017, then one would expect that it would vote in a similar fashion if it was to favor the deputy president. Any split in the Mount Kenya votes would be injurious on his presidential bid, number one. Alternatively, if it is, if the voting patterns are fractured in the Mount Kenya region, then it would mean that he would have to get the difference in terms of what he would lose in Mount Kenya elsewhere, be it Western, be it Coast, be it Northeastern, be it Nairobi or elsewhere. But more fundamentally, it is important to look at this by-election in Kiambaa in context. Number one, this is the first proper Jubilee versus UDA contest. In previous by-elections, let's say in Juja, it was PEP, which is an
by proxy, yes.
Or a proxy or a sister party to UDA. If you look at Msambweni, for example, where it all started, it was an independent candidate versus the ODM candidate. Jubilee didn't have a candidate, but was seen to support the ODM candidate. In Kibra, the Jubilee candidate there, MacDonald Mariga, was seen as a Deputy President William Ruto's candidate as opposed to the Jubilee candidate. And that's why you saw members of parliament from Jubilee campaigning for Imran Okoth, the ODM candidate. If you look at what happened in Kabuchai, if you look at what happened in Bonchari, if you look at what happened in Matungu, it was more of the ODM party versus the NASA, do we still say NASA or former NASA coalition in that context. So the first proper contest between Jubilee and UDA is in Kiambaa, and by extension in Mogoga. Maybe a little bit of it, what we saw in London. But there were also some factors at play. But I would argue that the first proper contest is in Kiambaa. Why? Because other than a ward race that is a little tight in terms of the voters, the number of polling stations, a constituency is a proper contest because it has a series of polling stations and a sizable number of registered voters. So it will give you, a good measure of what is happening. And this tight race tells you something. One would argue, no, this is a by-election in a parliamentary race, not necessarily a presidential election. Maybe the dynamics would change in a presidential contest. But whichever outcome will be in Kiambaa, it will give Jubilee some bragging rights if they win. It will give UDA some bragging rights if they win. And more so for the deputy president, he would say he has now managed to make inroads properly in the president's backyard.
And if they win, that would be the first proper UDA member of parliament that we have.
I think, Joe, we need to look at also what UDA is doing in other parts of the country in terms of voter registration. 5 days ago, they started voter registration exercise in Kisumu, and they're planning to have about 10,000 members registered in August. They started voter registration exercise in Rift Valley. I think to date they have over 2.8 million registered voters, as in UDA registered members, of the party. Of course, it's trying to bolster its chances in the polls. All these aspirants for governor, member of parliament, MCAs, all trying to sort of like they're rallying behind this whole exercise of trying to register members so that they can have members who can vote for them during the election. And I think to some extent UDA seems to be imejipanga for the elections, with the registration of voters, with fielding candidates. Now with what we're seeing in Kiambaa, with the campaigns that had been there, inaonekana ni kana kwamba they're actually really already in the 2022 campaign mode, as maybe compared to their opponents who are still trying to form these alliances. We're talking about Jubilee, ODM, tutaenda vipi, washaamua na wanaendelea mbele. And maybe if this continues and maybe they win this seat, it could maybe as a result of that planning that they are doing. But I think for me what also stands out in today's by-election is the fact that there was no violence like what we had witnessed in the other by-elections across the country, other than what we had seen, scuffles between Muskunya and some voters. But generally, the Muguga ward by-election and the Kiambaa by-election was peaceful. And for me, that really means a lot in terms of now how this whole exercise was conducted and hopefully going forward.
Yeah, and hopefully with the tallying process, and just the final vote count, because you remember, in the previous by-election, it had to be stopped for a while, in the middle of the night by the IEBC chair. So that would be interesting to see. But another thing, a hallmark for me that was, shows you how high stakes this was all the propaganda and the disinformation that was being spewed by both sides. If you recall, there was, a series of fake alerts that came out, I think, was it yesterday?
Last night, yeah.
And it was really a fake alert mimicking one of, the 411 alert saying the Jubilee Party candidate has withdrawn at this late hour. And immediately after we saw a counter from Raphael Tuju, the Jubilee Party Secretary General, we saw another one from the other side, another fake alert saying the UDA party candidate had withdrawn at the last race. And that is something not particularly typical with a by-election. So that just tells you how, for both sides and their supporters, how this is, a very important win. Just the attempt to try and, is it voter suppression or, diverting the voters' attention in such a manner for a by-election, at this stage, just tells you about the race ahead and, what's to come.
And Yvonne, I mean, it's interesting you say that, because I think what was interesting about these two by-elections is that there were a lot more than just constituency or ward by-election in the case of Muguga, because there's a sense in which they were so tied with sort of national dynamics that we've seen that I am sure at some point even the voters in those places were wondering what on earth was going on, because they suddenly see all of these people they've never
even
seen.
Even from different counties,
exactly.
completely coming there to...
Some people they only see on TV, they finally showed up there asking them to vote, and I see that the numbers have changed a little bit, but the margin seems to be quite in the range of 700 thereabouts. So it's going to be an interesting night.
721 actually now.
Yeah.
That's the difference. And as we said earlier, a lead of about between 500 and 700 is you can call it a healthy lead in a closely contested election as this one. This is actually one of the races where the winner would easily beat the first runners up with about 300 votes. Bearing in mind that the polling stations, the law says a polling station should not have more than 700 registered voters. You've seen some polling stations with about 300, 400, 500. So how tight the race is shows you, one, the kind of campaigns that were conducted, two, the dynamics at play. There were all these stories about the older voters versus the younger voters, which was quite interesting. And number two, the areas where these results are coming from. Remember, Kiambaa constituency has 5 wards with 32 polling centers, 34 polling centers, and 154 polling stations. So one ward, if let's say it's a stronghold of one candidate, you're likely to see results upsetting the numbers as they were. And then if the results from the other candidate's stronghold come, then they will also upset the numbers as it were. It is also a question of which were the strongholds for each of the contestants. It is important to note that Kareri Njama, the Jubilee candidate, comes from Kihara ward and actually voted at Gashie Primary School. On the other hand, the UDA candidate comes from Shianda ward and voted at the Mbegwa Primary School. And some of the battlegrounds were Karuri ward, where Banana Hill is, my village. And then there's also the Dendero ward, where Ruaka is. And you saw, even during the campaigns, the main candidates concentrated road shows, their rallies in Ruaka, Banana, and Gashie. Tells you something. These are very populated areas where the bulk of the voters come from. But that is what you would say the urban vote. There's also a little rural vote in the villages, interior villages. It is also important to note that the Jubilee candidate vied in 2017, and during the Jubilee nominations gave the former MP, the late Paul Koinange, a run for his money, and necessitated a repeat nominations after what we saw, Jubilee nominations, the cancellation, and